The air in the small coastal town always smelled of salt and promise, but for Kaori and Haru, it smelled of cherry blossoms and the infinite future. During their high school years, they were more than just a couple. They were two souls bound by shared dreams. They spent their afternoons by the river, talking about everything and nothing, convinced the thread connecting them was forged of something stronger than fate. It was a bond that felt unbreakable, a sanctuary of mutual understanding. On the day of their graduation, the sky was painted in the purples and golds of the golden hour. They stood beneath their favorite cherry blossom tree, petals falling like soft pink snow. Haru took Kaori's hands. They made a promise then, a sacred vow whispered into the cooling breeze. No matter where life took them, no matter how many miles stretched between them, they would always stay connected. They promised that a day would never pass without a word, a sign, or a reminder that they belonged to each other. But reality rarely respects the promises of the young. Haru received a scholarship to a university in a distant, bustling city. As the weeks turned into months, the physical distance began to manifest as a cold, creeping shadow. The vibrant world they shared began to fracture. Kaori stayed behind to finish her studies, tethered to the familiar streets, while Haru was swept up in the frantic pace of a metropolis. The long phone calls that used to last until dawn gradually shortened. The morning texts, once immediate, started arriving later, until they became echoes of a routine rather than expressions of love. Kaori felt the change in the marrow of her bones. She noticed the way Haru's replies became clinical, stripped of the warmth and inside jokes that had once been their secret language. Her messages were long and descriptive, but his responses were often just a few words. A cold knot of anxiety began to tighten in her chest, a weight that grew with every hour his phone remained silent. She found herself checking her notifications every few minutes, her thumb hovering over his name, wondering if she had said something wrong or if the city had simply swallowed the boy she knew. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The insecurity whispered that she was being forgotten, a relic of a past he was eager to leave behind. One night, driven to the edge of her endurance by days of silence, Kaori sat on her bed, the blue light of her phone illuminating her face. She spent hours crafting one final desperate message. It was a raw confession of her fears and a plea for him to speak to her. With a trembling finger, she hit the send button. She watched the notification bubble hover in the digital void, a tiny arrow representing her heart being cast into the darkness. The days that followed were a blur of agonizing hope and crushing despair. Kaori became a ghost in her own life, her eyes fixed on the screen that refused to light up with his name. Every vibration of her phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through her, followed by a sickening wave of disappointment when it was just a news update or a random app notification. She checked the read status obsessively, but it remained stubbornly blank. The silence was louder than any scream. 2 weeks had passed since she sent that message. Kaori was sitting in a quiet cafe, her phone resting on the table like a dormant bomb. She had finally decided that this was the day she would stop waiting. She would delete the thread and try to find a way to breathe again. But just as her hand reached for the device to end the torture, the screen flashed white. Her heart stopped. It was a cryptic news alert from his city, a headline about a tragic incident that had occurred on the very night she sent her plea. Her breath hitched as she read the first few lines, a cold dread washing over her. The headline about the accident in the city flickered on Kaori's screen, a brief flash of distant chaos. But as the minutes bled into hours and the hours into days, the details of that news report drifted away, overshadowed by Haru's silence. She had sent her heart in a text message, and the lack of a response felt like a deliberate erasure of her existence. Ghosting by a soulmate is a slow-acting poison. Kaori lived in the agonizing space between delivered and read, a digital purgatory where every second felt like a personal indictment. She began to wonder if the news alert was just a distraction, or if Haru had simply seen her message and decided silence was easiest. She entered university a shadow of her former self. The hopeful girl who had stood under the cherry blossoms was gone, replaced by a woman who measured her worth by the notifications she didn't receive. She was the ghost in her own life, haunting the hallways of her own potential. She tried to bury her memories of Haru under mountains of textbooks. Every time a new person tried to enter her life, she felt a cold wall rise up. Why should she open her heart when it could be so easily discarded without a single word? She was convinced that she was simply not enough for him. The self-blame was a constant companion, a voice whispering failures in every mirror. The world around her continued to turn, oblivious to her hollow space. Every blue sky or melody brought the trauma back. She reached out to mutual friends from high school, her voice trembling as she asked if anyone had heard from him. She wanted to know if he was happy, even if it was without her. Most looked away, their eyes filled with an awkward pity. Some said they hadn't spoken to him in months. Others claimed he had moved on to a prestigious internship and changed his number. Eventually, she stopped asking. It was easier to believe he had chosen to forget her than to face the mystery of his disappearance. 7 years passed with the relentless momentum of adulthood. Kaori moved to the capital, becoming a successful marketing executive. She was a professional who commanded respect, but her apartment was a sterile gallery of a life lived alone. She had mastered the art of the polite smile and the shallow conversation. Yet the void remained. She would often find herself staring at her phone in the middle of the night, looking at that old message thread she could never delete. The last seen status was a tombstone of a relationship that had died without a funeral. One rainy Tuesday, while navigating the chaotic surge of the Shinjuku train station, a flash of familiar features stopped her in her tracks. It was Haru's younger sister. They hadn't spoken since the graduation party. When their eyes met, a profound, soul-piercing sadness washed over the girl's face. She didn't offer a greeting. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn-out notebook, its edges frayed by time. With trembling hands, she pressed it into Kaori's palms along with a scrap of paper containing an address. The address led Kaori far away from the city to a forgotten coastal village. The train ride was a blur of emerald fields and crashing waves. When she finally stepped onto the platform, the air smelled of salt and stagnant memories. She walked until the pavement turned to gravel, arriving at a cottage that looked like it hadn't been touched in a decade. The garden was overgrown with weeds, and the shutters were pulled tight against the world. It was a place frozen in time. She hesitated for a moment. Everything was still. She stood at the gate, her heart hammering, expecting to see Haru through the window. But the house remained silent, a tomb of secrets that had been waiting for her all along through the years. The gate creaked with a high-pitched moan as Kaori pushed it open, a sound that had been absent from this quiet street for nearly a decade. She stepped into the overgrown garden, her heels sinking into the soft earth that had reclaimed the path. The cottage stood as a monument to a life interrupted, silent against the salt spray of the sea. She found the spare key where Haru had once jokingly told her it would always be, tucked inside a hollow ceramic owl near the porch, its painted eyes now faded by years of exposure. As the door swung open, the scent of stale air and cedar hit her like a physical weight. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light piercing through the gaps in the heavy curtains. It was exactly as he had left it. A half-finished book remained on the table. A sweater was still draped over the back of a chair, and a calendar on the wall was stuck forever on the month their shared world had ended. Her feet led her instinctively toward the bedroom, the most private corner of his world. There, on the small wooden bedside table, sat a sight that felt like a localized miracle. A smartphone, an older model with a cracked screen, was connected to a charging cable that snaked behind the headboard. Its small green notification light flickered steadily, a mechanical heartbeat in a tomb. Next to it lay a folded piece of stationery, the paper yellowed but the elegant handwriting unmistakably that of Haru's mother. With trembling fingers, Kaori opened the letter. The words were a cascade of quiet, enduring grief. His mother wrote of her inability to let go, of how she had visited this house every week to ensure the phone never died. She had kept the line active, paying the bills for years, hoping that by keeping his digital presence alive, a part of his soul would remain anchored to the earth. The truth within the letter was a physical blow that robbed her breath. On that midnight years ago, Haru hadn't been ignoring her or moving on. He had been overwhelmed by the same longing she felt. He had spent his final hours packing a small bag, intending to take the late-night train to surprise her at her doorstep the next morning. He was running toward her, not away. The news report Kaori had glimpsed was the missing piece. A reckless driver had stolen his future just blocks from the station. He had been rushed to the hospital with nothing but his keys and the phone he had been clutching in his hand when the world went dark. Kaori picked up the device, its weight familiar yet foreign. The screen glowed to life, showing her own face, a grainy photo from a summer festival they had attended together as the wallpaper. She bypassed the lock, her hands shaking, and opened their last conversation. There it was, her long, desperate plea for him to speak to her. Below it, the small icon indicated it had been read at 12:14 a.m. He had seen it. He had known she loved him in his final conscious moments. But there was something more. A ghost within the machine. She tapped the text box, and a draft appeared, frozen in the middle of a sentence he never got to send. "I'm on my way, Kaori. I'm so sorry I was quiet. I was working extra shifts to afford the trip to see you. Please don't cry. I love you more than anything." The sentence ended there, a fragment of a soul lost to a sudden silence. The wall she had built around her heart for 7 years didn't just crack, it vanished. She collapsed onto the dusty bed, clutching the cold plastic of the phone to her chest, sobbing for the boy who had died with her name on his lips. The years of self-loathing, the belief that she wasn't enough, and the bitterness of being ghosted dissolved into a pure, agonizing sorrow. It wasn't rejection, it was a tragedy that neither of them could have prevented. As the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the room, Kaori walked to the cliffside overlooking the restless Pacific. The wind whipped her hair across her face, tasting of salt and finality. She looked out at the horizon where the sky met the sea, the same view Haru had described in his letters. She didn't need a reply anymore. The unsent draft was the only answer she would ever need to carry her forward. "I love you too, Haru," she whispered into the gale, releasing the last of her pain into the air. She finally understood that while the world saw a tragic silence, their last moments had been a bridge of unspoken devotion. As the first stars appeared, Kaori turned away from the edge, walking back toward a life that no longer felt hollow. He had never left her. He had simply been waiting for her to find the truth, and now she was finally free to live for both of them.